Hi, everyone. I'm Anica Butler, the Ideas Editor at the Boston Globe, and welcome to this Globe Up Talk today for a discussion on how we might start to shift to a more locally focused food supply. Globe Up Talks is a new series of conversations that we've launched in which members of the Globe editorial board interview world-leading thinkers and unique voices who write for the Globe ideas and opinion sections. So I'd like to welcome our guest today, Kathleen Finlay, who is the president of the Glenwood Center for Regional Food and Farming and founder of Pleiades, a national network of women environmental leaders. Previously, Kathleen was the managing director of Harvard Medical School's Center for Health and the Global Environment. Welcome, Kathleen. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, hi, Anica. Thanks so much for having me today.
So I have a lot of questions, and I know our viewers do too, and not a lot of time, so I'm just going to jump right in.
Great.
So since the start of the pandemic, we've seen images of empty store shelves. We're facing meat shortages after workers have gotten sick at processing plants. And we've seen images of farmers destroying crops and other food items juxtaposed with really heartbreaking images of extremely long waits at food banks. And we'll get into each one of those issues individually, but I wanted to ask you first, collectively, when you see all of these things, what does that tell you? And what should it tell us about our current food supply system? And is the system broken?
Yeah, I mean, I would argue absolutely. And when we talk about the food system, we're talking about sort of the national commodity, big ag food system. That's where most of us get our groceries. And I think what we're seeing in this pandemic is the fragility of that system and where it's vulnerable when you have such a centralized, commoditized system. It can start to break down with things like we're seeing in the processing plants or distribution. Getting food to people is right now in our conventional system, it relies on a couple of nodes. And when those nodes start to break down, then that's what we're seeing is a tough way for that food to get to people that need it.
So you work with local farmers in the Hudson Valley. I'm wondering what kinds of issues are they facing at this time, and how are you helping them?
Yeah, so we advocate in direct opposition of that nationalized, commoditized food system. We try to promote a more regionalized, decentralized food system, and we argue that that's more resilient to many threats that we're seeing. Climate change is not a new threat, but certainly the pandemic is a threat we're all feeling. And the farmers that we work with are, there's a few different stories. The farmers that were set up to sell food directly to customers are seeing an uptick, especially our farmers that are based on CSA or subscription-based ways of distributing food, where you pay up front for your season and you get a share each week or every other week. Those farmers are seeing demand through the roof. Our farmers markets are seeing an increase in demand. At the same time, our wholesale farmers that supply restaurants are having a really tough time because their main clients, in some cases just one client, is no longer able to purchase their food. So it's a range, but we have a really strong network of farmers here in the Hudson Valley. And one of the things I'm so thankful for is the work that we've done at Glenwood to formally build those networks so that, you know, when the pandemic hit, we were able to get information, resources, protocol, get on the phone with epidemiologists and medical doctors. What's safe on your farm? How do we farm safely? How do we get our food to our customers? So we were able to respond because of the coalition and networking building work that we've been doing for years here at Glenwood.
Yeah, I would like to know a little bit about that. How do you farm safely, and how do you keep the workers there safe, and how do you get food to people without risk?
Yeah, so we've developed and shared, there's many resources based on CDC and then just like kind of farmer know-how, but ways to farm. What we've done on our system is we have different levels that respond to something that might be happening on farm. Like if someone is exposed to a positive COVID case, we have a space, a house where they can quarantine for 2 weeks, et cetera, before they integrate back on the farm. Farming is pretty easy to accommodate physical distancing, but we have protocols around wearing masks. If you're going in and out of a greenhouse, for example, physical distancing always, not sharing tools, not riding in trucks together, all of that modification. And then in terms of like our CSA pickup this season will likely be drive-by. So we'll pre-pack boxes and put them in people's cars for them. A lot of CSAs are doing that. Farmers Market has a whole range of protocols in terms of being able to physically distance and having lines that are physically distanced. So yeah, pretty adaptable crew, those farmers. So they're with gusto kind of making sure that they're safe, that farmers are safe, and that their clients and the people who they serve are safe.
Yeah, I know the CSA that I belong to here in Massachusetts, they've now started doing delivery, which they didn't do before, which is great. And there's farmers markets that are, you order everything you want in advance, you pull up, they put the box in your car, which
yeah,
you know, it takes away the fun of shopping and looking at the things, which is what I miss right now about farmers markets. But it is, you know, a lot safer, and it's been great to see that people can still get fresh local produce. You mentioned that regional farming is more sustainable. Can you talk a little bit about why regional farming is more sustainable versus the big commercial centralized farming?
Yeah, I mean, philosophically, the kinds of farmers that we work with here in the Hudson Valley are primarily driven by values of social justice, of environmental protection, health, human health, community health, as opposed to sort of a for-profit conventional food company that's really, I would argue, valuing dollars for a select few folks rather than inherently sharing the values that I just described. So the sustainability, you could break it down to the number of miles that food is transported, to the number of different packaging and processing interventions that happen with a typical commodity food processing system. The type of farming that the farmers we work with tend to practice is humane and has a real commitment to environmental sustainability. So just the practices in terms of maintaining carbon in the soil and no-till. So a whole range of protocols that are really aligned with the values of the kinds of folks that get into the sustainable food movement. And you know, that the less distance between eater and farmer, I think is better for all kinds of reasons, including like one's connection with food as a life-giving source and one's most profound interaction with the natural world. So that shortening of those nodes, the distance between them, I think, is inherently more sustainable.
And do you think that sustainability can continue? You mentioned that CSAs and farmers markets are becoming way more popular right now as people are desperately looking for food. As the demand grows and as people realize that local is a good alternative, is it still sustainable? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, will the local farms be able to scale?
Boy, I hope so. I mean, I don't worry so much about the farmers being able to scale. I hope that we keep those folks who we charm right now during this crisis, and that they taste and experience the value of supporting their local farms, and that you know that continues way beyond a reopening or when other options feel more tangible or accessible. So I do think the market studies that we've done on CSA in particular reveal that while some of us may know what a CSA is, by far the vast majority of our population has never heard of CSA, doesn't know what it stands for, doesn't know where their CSAs are locally. So as it's getting more attention, I mean, really the sellout rate is crazy around here, then I hope we'll win some hearts and minds that will continue to last. And CSAs are just one of the most, they're not that expensive when you compare it to a big grocery store. It's on par with what you would buy at a Walmart or a Stop and Shop. And the health outcomes are incredible in terms of it can really promote health in your household. And then that community connection with your farmer. It's not measurable, but in my experience, it's a very positive thing.
Well, you just reminded me that we've been saying CSA and talking about it as though everybody knows what it is, and maybe there are people who don't yet know what it is. Can you tell us what does it stand for, and how do they generally work?
Yeah, so it stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And generally, there's lots of different forms and variations, but the idea is that the eater kind of shares the risk with the farmer. So you typically subscribe by purchasing your share up front in the winter season when the farmers need the capital the most. They use those funds to buy seeds or equipment they need for the season ahead. And then every week or every other week, you pick up your share of that week's harvest. So if the farmer, if it's a really cold spring and those early vegetables aren't as robust, you kind of take what you get your share. So especially for new entry farmers, it's a really wonderful business model because it gives them the capital they need up front, and you can kind of share that risk with your customer. It's a great model.
And as on the other side of it, what's fun about getting a CSA box is you don't always know what you're going to get, and trying to figure out what you're going to make. And sometimes you get something you're like, okay, I'm not really sure what this is, and I'm going to experiment. And it leads to lots of fun in the kitchen, in my opinion.
Yeah, and studies show that diversity is really important for our health. So even if you're bagging the number of fruits and vegetable servings every day religiously, if you're doing that just with broccoli, you're not getting nearly the profile nutritionally that is optimal. So again, it's like one of the healthiest ways that a household can kind of create their menus every week.
Well, let's talk about meat shares a bit, since we've been talking about produce. With meat shortages happening, or looming at least, more people are turning to meat shares, and I know that there are a waiting list for a couple here in Massachusetts now. Can you talk about, well, how does the meat share work, and how do people do that and turn to more locally focused meat?
Sure. I mean, it's the same exact way if it's a true CSA model. Some farms sell individuals, like our farm here, we sell individual meat boxes. So it's just a one-off collection of different cuts of meat, or just direct sales to farmers. So, I mean, to customers from a farm. So it's not dissimilar at all to the CSA or the vegetable production. And we're seeing an increase in demand. Meat can be produced year round. So before that big vegetable season starts, we're seeing meat really be affected right now locally in terms of demand. So it's kind of the same way. You have to find your local farms and figure out what way they're distributing that meat, and get in line right now.
So what are the benefits, not just health-wise, but also just for the food system? Why should we be looking toward locally sourced meat?
I mean, what we're seeing now play out in the meat supply chain, I mean, it's something like there's only 50 processing plants that serve 98% of the slaughtering in the country. I think that's accurate. So in any case, then there's a few processing plants that see a large number of our animals come through and get processed. So even that alone, right? So that's why we're seeing these shortages, is that COVID hits one of those plants, they have a problem, they can't get up and running, and so then it just ripples down. The other issues around meat is that all meat is not created equal. The kinds of meat we produce here, for example, on our farm, are pasture raised. We have the highest standard of animal husbandry. Our animals are out on pasture almost all year. They're grass fed. So those commodity markets for meat are typically much less sensitive about environmental or the animal welfare values that that I'm sure many of us with awareness would care about. So with meat, there's like several issues. I really applaud Elizabeth Warren for introducing some legislation to ban that kind of factory farming that we're seeing as part of that food supply chain that's being affected in the meat supply chain. So it's the same whether it's meat or vegetables. So it's supporting a farmer who really cares about the environment, who cares about the animals, who cares about their community and their customers. I mean, it's just a much more sustainable system.
So what happens if Senator Warren's ban, if this were to actually happen? There's a ban on factory meat farming. Everyone is now turning toward local, regional sources for their meat. I think some of the concerns that people might have is, how much more expensive is this going to be? Will my family be able to afford it? Will there actually be enough meat made by local farms for everyone to get what they need?
Yeah, those are all really big and important questions. I often get the question about affordability and like, can local produce or regional product, whether it's meat or vegetables, feed all of us? And my answer to that is imperfect, but it is incumbent upon us to try and build a system that values health and the environment. And we haven't put the resources or incentives into that system nearly as much as we've incentivized a commodity or centralized food system. So it's a lack of imagination. It's akin to saying we should continue our dependence on fossil fuels and not imagine a green revolution. We don't know the answer about how much we can produce, what the cost can truly be, if all of us are just working on this regional system without the same resources that the big conventional system is benefiting from. And I think if we put our imagination and our engineering and our intellect into building a healthier, more sustainable food system, I think we could figure out how to do that in a way that feeds people, that pays farmers and food laborers fairly, and that supports farmers. Yeah. So I think it's possible.
So it sounds like a possible future food system would resemble the food system of the past in a way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more, technological advances and ingenuity than there were in the past, and sort of some better understanding of things like climate change and soil science and things that weren't available and accessible when, sort of pre-industrial revolution. But there are some similarities in terms of, a more decentralized food system makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons.
So in the op-ed that you wrote for the Globe, you talked about this time it being a moment for large-scale change, that this is a moment that now we're seeing the problems in the system that we have. You've just underlined, the benefits of a new system, of trying a new way. So what specific things would you like to see us try right now, or how can the government help us shift to this new system? What do we need to do now to take advantage of this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think a national food policy that supports the kind of farming that I'm talking about, regenerative farming, that reforms some of the labor all along the food chain, a really inspired, kind of like a Green New Deal for food and farming, basically. And you can take any part of that, you can take meat production and think about what could incentivize farms like the ones we work with in the Hudson Valley to continue their pasture-based farming. That's access to land is involved in that, access to resources, some subsidies from the government that really promote this type of farming as opposed to farming that hurts our environment and doesn't treat animals well. So a whole host of policy incentives on specific issues, but in general, it would be really nice to have some federal leadership on a national food policy that is driven by health and not by profits. And so that's sort of the ultimate ask, and really attention due where there has been little. Food is arguably one of the most profound ways that we affect the environment and our most fundamental human health factor. So right now we're in a moment where we understand the importance of our health. We're all a little scared about what can happen to us and our families, and health is a constant desire for all of us. So we ought to have a food system that promotes health as a starting point.
All right, I'm going to ask you two more quick questions before we kick it over to audience questions. And one is, you just were talking about policy incentives that we need to do, and how, if people want to see the government focus more on policy initiatives, is there a resource somewhere where people can find out about maybe pending legislation or who they should be lobbying, or what individuals can do to play a role in helping change the food system?
Yeah, there are several on both a local and national level, several resources that people can visit. I like there's some media outlets, Civil Eats and Fern are really good places to get specific reporting on these issues, and they have good coverage of policy issues. The American Farmland Trust, in terms of legislation, is a national body that has chapters in each state. They're a great resource. The National Young Farmers Coalition is very active on policy issues, really representing the kind of farmers that we work with here in the Hudson Valley who are advocating for a new food system. And they have asks for the Farm Bill and asks for local reps by state. So those are all good resources.
Great, thank you. And one last question from me. We talked about at the very beginning about these really long food lines, food banks that we've seen. And I'm wondering if you think that a regional food system can play a role in helping feed people who right now are hungry and need it.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking that question. The last few weeks, Glenwood has been focusing just on this issue. And what's interesting, again, in a way that this pandemic is shining a light on some of the things that are broken in our system, right? So the emergency food system, and we're talking about food pantries and soup kitchens and things like that, that serve folks who need food. In my experience, has been disparate from the regional food movement. So those emergency providers rely on the conventional food system for a lot of their product, a lot of expired product, processed product, extras, and their donations, right? So we're working pretty hard in New York, and others are working nationally to take to in this moment, see if we can actually pay farms for their product and move it into the emergency food system. Not rely on their donations, but actually contract them so that they don't all go to CSAs, which are folks with resources. Can we save some of that crop to be put into the emergency food system, which is getting flooded, inundated? I mean, the metrics are through the roof. So how can we enlist our local farmers as part of that call to meet the increasing need because of the economic crisis? And again, like all of this, I think that will have could have major benefits in the long term for those regional farms and the emergency food system providers to work much more closely together.
Well, it certainly would have benefits for people receiving the food. Imagine receiving fresh produce versus, just only shelf-stable products. But I'm wondering, in this model that you mentioned, you're talking about paying the farmers. So where does that money come from, and who pays the farmers for that?
Yeah, so again, I mean, the USDA just released a pretty significant funding source for those efforts. States are releasing funding for that effort. We're raising philanthropic money from foundations and individuals. We started a food access fund here at Glenwood. to increase the donations that we're doing locally. So a lot of different sources. It really, for it to make a big difference, needs federal and state dollars. And folks are listening and responding. So it's a good sign.
That is really, really great to hear.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and we'll turn to reader questions now. So I'd like to invite Chris Avello, the Director of Subscriber Experience at the Globe, to share some of the questions that he selected.
Thank you, Anica. Thank you, Kathleen. Hi, everyone. Always want to take a brief moment before we do this to just say thank you to all the Globe subscribers and readers who are joining us live and who have submitted questions. We couldn't do this without you, so thank you. The first one comes in from Margie. She asks, what are some of the best resources to help people find local sellers and begin buying locally for the first time?
Yeah, there's a few national resources, localharvest.org, but the really great resources are probably within your state. So depending on what state you are, it's a little different. But if you just go to the Department of Agriculture in your state, they usually have a list of farms and you can click through there. If you're in New York, we have Hudson Valley CSA.org is a directory of farms. In Massachusetts, Mass Grown is a great resource. Massgrown.org is a great resource to find local farms.
And do you have any advice for people who have maybe never purchased this way before, after they find a local seller, some behavioral changes they might need to make, or some ways of thinking about how they get their food?
No, I think just make sure that the farm has some sort of safety protocol in place. Almost all farms do now. It's a pretty, the resources are now widely shared, you know, and it's the same CDC guidelines that everybody's using, you know, physical distancing, masks if you're any closer, all of those types of things. Yeah.
Cool. This next one comes in from Peggy. She asks, with so many people living in cities and urban areas, is it time to expand on community gardening, and exploring rooftop and patio gardening?
I love this question because we're just about to launch an initiative to encourage home growing here at Glenwood. You know, like growing food is like bringing magic into your life. So I would just encourage everyone to, if they can, to grow some food. We are going to have a resource called Ask a Farmer at glenwood.org. So you can, as you're growing, you can have a farmer on tap to like figure out what's going right or wrong in your garden. But, you know, supplying, you know, growing your own food is just, it's healthy, it's fun, it's kind of amazing. So absolutely. And there's resources to help you get started, including on Glenwood's website. So yes, grow. Great. I'm calling them Q gardens, by the way. Awesome. Short for quarantine, with a little nod to the KEW gardens in England.
I will ask one more from a subscriber, and this one comes from Jeannie. She said, with so many New England farmers are thwarted by land access and affordability, what do you see as solutions to those issues, especially for young farmers?
Such a great question. The land access has been a barrier that we've been grappling with for a long time here in our efforts at Glenwood. And while it's still a challenge, there are some great improvements, I would say, in the last few years. One is a number of matching programs between landowners and farmers. So landowners who want someone to farm their land, there's several matching programs, including one in Massachusetts, Land for Good. There's a growing awareness from the land trust or land conservation movement that working landscapes are really important and should be protected. So now there's easements that bring down the market value of land, especially if it is under a requirement to be farmed. So those types of easements make the price point a little bit easier for new entry farmers. And then there's a number of loans and other resources that institutions like Glenwood help steer toward new entry farmers so that they can get on that land and do so in a way that's sustainable.
That's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Chris. Kathleen, I want to ask you another question that came in from a reader. And I think it's a pretty important one. And they're asking about whether CSAs accept EBT cards. I don't know if that's different in New York, but I believe that the answer is that a lot of them do, if not all. Is that right?
So that is, I couldn't have asked for a better question, but so traditionally it's been really hard to subscribe to a CSA using your SNAP dollars, your food assistance dollars, because the way those funds are distributed to individuals doesn't allow you to do that lump sum up front that I talked about. We are actually piloting this year for the first time using we received a grant from the USDA that we're piloting how to make that easier. How can farms who do CSA work with SNAP recipients in a way that works for both of them? And it's essentially creating a loan fund that pays the farmer up front and then is reimbursed by the SNAP dollars as they come in. So the EBT cards and food assistance dollars are now increasingly accessible at farmers markets and farm stores and farm stands. That's been getting better and better. CSA, it's been hard, but we're hoping this year to work it out here in New York, and then of course share that experience nationally so that other farms in this subscription model can serve those folks.
That sounds really great. And so I had that totally wrong. I must have been thinking about farmers markets. So it sounds like here in Massachusetts for now, what people should do if they've got food assistance dollars is try to get farmers markets. And hopefully soon you will have pioneered the way to use that money for CSAs as well.
Yeah. I also find that farms that have CSA offerings really respond to customers, because they might be able to take EBT and it just might be that lump payment that's difficult. And a lot of the farms I know are willing to work with clients. So I just put that out there that if that kind of setup is a barrier, just to ask and see what's possible with your farmer.
That's great. Let's see, we have just a few more minutes. Is there anything that you want to leave with our viewers or any topics that we didn't hit upon that you think are important for us to know?
You did a great job. I just would encourage listeners and watchers to, seek out the farms that are close to them, support them, and then seek out the policy representatives that really care about a sane future of food in this country, and hold all the stories that we're hearing about the food supply, think about them in this way of kind of our centralized, commodified food system versus the kind of food system that we've been talking about and advocating for. And, just kind of go through a thought process of imagining, join that collective imagination of what a healthy, sustainable food system could look like in this country. Because we need the customers to demand it and our policy makers to advocate for it. And we've got the farmers to do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathleen. This has been a really fun conversation.
Yeah, really great. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And thanks to the audience for joining us today for this Op Talk. This is an experiment, as I mentioned before, so we'd love to hear your feedback. And I welcome you to visit the Globe Ideas section on bostonglobe.com, where you can read Kathleen's op-ed, which has some resources also for finding local food. And please join us for future Op Talks. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Anica.